2023 may go down as one of the best years for gaming in a long time, with excellent titles such as Atomic Heart, Lies of P, Hogwarts Legacy, Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy XVI, Hi-Fi Rush, just to name a few. You can make an argument for why any one of these could be Game of the Year, and it would make total sense. But when it boils down to it, there are two huge games that everyone has their eyes on to take the top spot: Tears of the Kingdom and Spider-Man 2, because we all know it isn't going to be Starfield. More often than not, people are claiming that Tears of the Kingdom has won it already, but the rationale behind it, quite frankly, makes no sense to me. Any argument that can be made for why Tears of the Kingdom should win can also be made for Spider-Man 2. People have their nostalgia goggles strapped on tight and refuse to take them off. Spider-Man 2 is just as much a contender for Game of the Year, and I shouldn't have to spell it out for you, but it looks like I'm going to have to anyway. One of the main arguments I hear for why Spider-Man 2 will not be winning Game of the Year is because it's a sequel. People claim that sequels almost never win Game of the Year and that it shouldn't even be considered. There are three main problems with that argument. One, sequels are constantly winning Game of the Year. There have been 9 Game of the Year awards given out, and almost half of them are sequels, reboots, or even pre-existing franchises. Simply because a game doesn't offer a brand new IP doesn't automatically disqualify it. 2, Tears of the Kingdom is also a sequel. There's no way you can say that in the same breath Tears of the Kingdom deserves Game of the Year and Spider-Man 2 simply because one is a sequel. They both are. 3, if a game is a sequel but listens to its fans by taking the best elements from the first game, expands upon it, and trims out the worst parts of the game, then it has every right to be considered. Another complaint I hear often is that Spider-Man 2 is just DLC. Claiming that this is just more of the same game is absolutely wild. The level of changes between the first and second game is on par with the amount of changes between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Both games have made changes to the map as a whole. Tears of the Kingdom added an entirely new area above and below the original world, expanding what was there, offering a lot more to explore. That's a huge plus. But Spider-Man 2 is doing the same thing. Tears of the Kingdom will be bigger, of course, but it is a gigantic open world. By nature, they are much larger in scale, and bigger doesn't always equal better. Combat is another thing that changed between these two new releases and the first games released in their series. Combat is an important aspect in both of these games, but one appears to have had an upgrade while the other remains almost unchanged. Tears of the Kingdom's combat didn't change too much from Breath of the Wild. I'm glad they added the fuse skill, but at the end of the day, it added next to nothing to its core combat mechanics. It has the dodge, parry, flurry attacks, all the same. I mean, cool, you can add explosives to a stone bird to drop on an enemy, but overall, the combat feels stale. It's like the dev said, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I have to give some credit where credit is due. The rewind ability was a cool new feature that improved some of the combat experiences, and people don't seem to talk about that skill enough. But the fuse ability didn't add too much to the combat. Unless you wanted to look up a tutorial on how to assemble a laser cannon, gather the materials, level yourself up to get a battery that will last long enough for your monstrous invention, and by that point you've spent 3 hours fighting just one medium level enemy. They really leaned heavily into the fuse ability for combat expansion, but I just didn't feel it was executed to the best of its ability. Now, I'm not saying that the fuse ability doesn't have some cool application in the game, because it for sure does. The technical marvel of allowing multiple things to be able to adhere to each other and function in multiple ways can't be understated. But I felt like in their marketing, they leaned into adding a whole nother layer of combat. Realistically, only a small percentage of total players were making giant mechs or tanks capable of taking on the Demon King himself. Most everyone else was just running around and seeing what it was that they could fuse while adding no real benefit to the gameplay. You can say that the combat innovation potential is limitless with Tears of the Kingdom's fuse ability, but aside from absolutely torturing the Koroks, you're pretty much limited to how many laser bombs you can Gorilla Glue to your makeshift Kia Soul. The Ascend ability was another sadly wasted mechanic. It was designed as an escape route for situations where you found yourself stuck, and in very rare moments it could be used in combat. But it was another ability that just kind of fell by the wayside, not offering anything new for combat or exploration. Most of my friends who played the game forgot they had the ability until they were almost finished with the story. While we don't have nearly as much info on Spider-Man 2's combat, within the first 10 minutes of gameplay featured at PlayStation Showcase, we got a deep dive into the new and improved way to take down baddies. Yes, some of the core gameplay remained the same. You have your bullet dodging, web takedowns, and the good old triangle circle. But between just one fight alone between Peter and Kraven's men, we see how much the combat changes once they implement the symbiote suit. Evasion takes a backseat as our new abilities are geared for maximum aggression. All new takedowns that have a focus on crowd control, we get to interact with the world in ways we weren't able to do before, and the attacks utilize the symbiote heavily, giving us not only more aggressive gameplay, but a cool new look to our attacks. You can see that they are pulling major inspiration from Web of Shadows, which is widely considered one of the greatest Spider-Man games of all time, and that's just Peter's gameplay. If we look at Miles' section that was shown, we see they have heavily improved our gadget abilities, our stealth takedowns aren't limited to just single individuals anymore, and a whole new set of takedowns utilizing Miles' Venom Strike. With the new UI, we can see how they are setting up two different ability wheels, R1 being our gadgets and L1 being like special attacks, something that we didn't have in either of the previous games. Now, I have heard a ton of people complain about Spider-Man 2 being an exclusive and how exclusive shouldn't win, and I'm sorry, did we forget that Tears of the Kingdom is only playable on Switch? Tears of the Kingdom is a console exclusive. You were only saying that about Spider-Man 2 because you have an issue with PlayStation exclusives, not exclusives in general. Also, this may be a hot take, but there is just way too much pandering to people who have not played the first game before. Both of these games are sequels, but for Tears of the Kingdom, it is essentially the first game with a few new developments, and it's done in the worst way possible, and that's not an exaggeration. You start from square one, you have no abilities, no gear, and you literally don't even know what an apple is. You have to relearn everything from the first game. There is no carryover. I have no doubt that the game is going to ramp up down the line, but after 10 hours of playtime spent exclusively on unlocking the map and rediscovering shrines, I feel like I wasted my time playing the first game since all of my progress got ripped away. I would love to just jump into the world and see what new things they have available, but starting over with 1 stamina bar and 3 hearts, if you try to jump into this world like that, you're gonna get eaten alive. And yeah, that's normal to start off in games with nothing and build yourself up. It's what you had to do in Breath of the Wild, but this is a sequel and it was marketed as such, and it sucks that it fails to do what other sequels excelled in. Jedi Survivor, for example, started you off with all the core mechanics that had to be unlocked in the first game. In Fallen Order, you had next to no force abilities, no extra stances, and movement felt somewhat sluggish. By the time you had reached the end of the game, you had multiple force abilities, several stances, and a tool to make traversal faster and more fluid. When you start off in Survivor, you aren't reset at square one. The tutorial, an interactive mission that lasts less than 30 minutes, refreshes you on all the abilities you had from the first game, since you already spent 20 hours learning and mastering those moves. It gives new players a fast-paced and exciting experience while rewarding veterans of the game by allowing them to pick up where they left off. Yes, you also had to uncover the map again, but you're in a whole new area never explored before, so it doesn't feel that repetitive. Now don't get me wrong, I love God of War Ragnarok, but even I have to admit I had similar issues with that my abilities didn't carry over, just like in Tears of the Kingdom. All of the runic abilities that they learned from the first game, I lost. Yes, there was an end-game explanation for why I had to relearn them, but that didn't make starting from scratch any less aggravating. But at least here we had both weapons to start and improve upon, where in the first game, all we had was the axe. And the map was the same as in the first, but everywhere we had explored had shifted and changed in some way due to the effects of Fimbulwinter, so exploration still felt rewarding. You get almost none of that with Tears of the Kingdom. You have absolutely no previous abilities, the entire map needs to be rediscovered, and rediscovering the old map doesn't feel as rewarding or as engaging. It feels exhausting and repetitive. Unless it is a hard reset for a franchise like God of War 2018 or even Breath of the Wild in 2017, it shouldn't be ridiculous to have the audience do a little bit of homework and understand what is going to happen in the next game. Again, while we don't have Spider-Man 2 in our hands yet, we can safely assume we won't be doing a hard reset of all our progress. For starters, we more than likely won't need to unlock the entire map again. In Miles Morales, we didn't have to run across the entire city refixing the crime towers so that we could see the map again. It carried over from the last game, which made traversal and item discovery so much easier. Realistically, the only areas in which we have to unlock will be whatever new boroughs they make available to us. We already have Queens and Brooklyn confirmed as the new areas to explore. While we did have to develop new gadgets for Miles throughout the game, he was a new playable character without his own gear. It was natural for us to build up his arsenal and keep it comparable to Peter's lineup without being a direct copy. And Miles did have less gadgets at his disposal, but by the end of the game, we were very quickly given Venom abilities to make up for the lack of gadgets. And in the new game, we will have both Peter and Miles as playable characters. It's more than likely that, at the very least, some of their individual abilities will cross over into this next title. Both of these games have new, unexplored areas that need to be uncovered. Both of these games have new mechanics to set them apart from their predecessors, including new ways to traverse the map and handle enemies. Both are exclusive to one console and sequels to games that have been called absolute masterpieces. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to what you want to see in your video game. There are two things that I look for in my games: strong narrative structure and engaging gameplay, and only one of these games has both.